You don't need to be the sage on the stage. Look at yourself as the guide on the side. As teachers, we don't need to know it all. We just need to be ready to help them get the resources that can continue to help.
Back to Educator University. As teachers, it's often our brightest students who challenge us the most. Today's guest, Becca has over 6 years of experience working with gifted and talented students and holds an endorsement in gifted and talented education. If you ever wondered what giftedness truly looks like or how to actively engage your students, this episode is for you. Welcome, Becca.
Hi.
I forgot to mention she's also my friend, so should be hopefully a relaxed and more chill interview. So I think the first question a lot of teachers have is, can you describe to us what gifted education might look like, other than just students who are getting straight A's or fast finishers? Are there other things to look for when we're thinking about gifted education?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you're starting with that, because I think there's a lot of longstanding myths or stereotypes of what a gifted student looks like. And in reality, gifted students can look wildly differently from each other. And so first of all, it kind of helps to know what a definition is. And we don't have an agreed upon definition across the nation. State by state kind of has their own definitions, but most definitions have to do with these are students who are either high performing or have the potential to perform high above or advanced in comparison to other peers that are at their same age level, experience, and environment. And so I think a key part of that is it's not only the students that are currently high performing students. Oftentimes we think of that when we think of gifted students, but it's students who might have that potential or that capability, but without those services and without those supports, might not reach that potential. And so there's lots of different theories and models out there, but one that I think has been really helpful for me is one based on gifted profiles. So the works of George Betts, and I think her name was Maureen Nehart. They had been working with gifted for a long time, doctorates and psychologists who, over the course of their decades of working with gifted students, kind of narrowed down to 6 general types of gifted students. So I can kind of go through each of those. The first one is the successful learner. And that's what we oftentimes, what most people think of when they think of a gifted learner, is they're thinking of that successful learner. And those are the students who are very high achieving, want to do well, does really well in school, is obedient, works hard, gets along, does what they need to do, gets the straight A's, all of those kinds of things. And those successful students have really learned how the system works and what to do in order to do really well in the system. And so that's oftentimes what we visualize when we think of gifted learners. But that's only one type of gifted learner. Another very common one that I've experienced a lot in my time of teaching is the challenging gifted learner. And this is a student who is very highly divergent in their thinking. So very creative, very questioning, very in tune with fairness and injustice and that kind of thing. And so they can come across as actually students who are more disruptive in learning, or question authority, or question why are things the way they are. And so they might appear as disruptive, and they kind of question the system and why things are the way they are. And so a lot of teachers can sometimes feel a little frustrated with that type of gifted learner. Another type is the underground gifted learner. And these are students who just want to fit in. They don't want to stand out. They don't want others to know that they are gifted. And so they will purposefully underachieve or just kind of fly under the radar. And this is especially seen in middle school girls. And it can impact anyone, but especially in the middle school years with girls, you can see that coming through. Another possible profile is the dropout learner. And these are students that may just appear very, very disengaged or frustrated, performing way lower than they really could be performing. They might be bored, or they might just be shut down, just kind of checked out. And then another profile that we're learning a lot more about is the twice exceptional learner. And when I did my master's in curriculum and design, instructional design, I focused in on this profile specifically. And the twice exceptional learners are really interesting because they're gifted as well as hold another disability or specific learning disability or disorder. And so oftentimes the giftedness can mask the disability, or the disability can mask the giftedness. And so they might not be identified in either areas, or they might just be identified in one area, but they're not getting the supports that they need in both of those areas. So those students, their performance may be inconsistent, or you might be like, why is it taking this long? Or kind of organization can be a piece of it. And I've worked with a lot of students too in that twice exceptional gifted learners. And then finally, the last profile is the autonomous learner. And this, I like to think about it as like my goal as an educator is to eventually, by the time kids leave school, is to get them to this area where they are really independent and motivated and self-directed and like become those lifelong learners and don't rely on adults around them to tell them what to do or the systems around them to perform in certain ways, but like really just truly want to learn and could do that through their own self-motivation.
Yeah,
So
that's a
like I mentioned, yeah, like I've worked 15 years in my time with gifted learners. I've definitely worked with students in all of those different areas. And I think it's easy to kind of have a narrow focus of what that looks like. And especially if that's part of like your identification process, you can be missing out on a lot of students who truly could benefit from strategies and supports to help them, and especially with like underrepresented populations.
Yeah, I think that's great to remind ourselves that there are 6 types. I wasn't aware of those 6 types exactly. So that's good to be reminded that it's really a broad view when you think about gifted and talented. It's not always the view that you might traditionally think, which is that straight A, finish early, open compliant kind of student. It might be something a little different.
Exactly.
Yeah. Some teachers might say, well, these students are already smart. Why do I need to challenge them even further? So could you share about a little bit about your perspective on why these students need a little bit of a challenge?
Absolutely. And you're just spot on with like helping uncover some of these most common myths and most common like deep held beliefs that a lot of people have. And so I think that's awesome you're bringing this up because I've definitely thought that as a teacher. Almost anyone I talk to have thought has also at one time or another kind of thought that of like we are just bombarded with so many needs. And it's easy to be like, well, that kid's already above standard. And so they'll be fine. Like they're okay. And I try to check myself in recognizing and realizing that these are kids too. And that just because they're high performing or highly capable doesn't mean that they're already an autonomous, self-directed learner and that they will be fine on their own. And so when I was taking a lot of my courses for my endorsement, I remember my professors kind of reminding us of like, in a year's worth of school, your goal is that your kids could grow a year's worth. And so even if a student comes in reading above grade level, you would still like to see that there's growth for that student after a year. And so just kind of like letting them be is not the way to do that. And in fact, there can be like a lot of harmful outcomes if you don't focus in on meeting the needs of these students. And with those 6 profiles that I mentioned, there's even specific risks that come with each of those types of learners if they are not like caught early enough or supported in a way to really help them thrive and meet their full potential. And even those autonomous learners still need good role models, mentor, rich experiences to continue to learn and grow. So, going kind of back to those 6 profiles, a successful learner obviously is oftentimes that one where it's like, oh, well, they're doing great. They can kind of carry it. They don't need a lot of extra support. But what we found is that that type of learner can sometimes when they get to college might be the ones that just get overwhelmed and then end up underachieving when more of the learning is put on them and less on others telling them what to do. And they can also struggle from like unhealthy perfectionism, approvals, buckle under kind of the pressures and the challenging situations as they get older, unless they have been supported throughout their elementary, middle, and high school years in knowing how to deal with those challenges and how to kind of like build that autonomy. The challenger students, if kind of left to be, they really can kind of experience a lot of frustration or low self-esteem because of not feeling like that they fit or are valued for what they have to bring and to offer. And then they might end up becoming at risk of becoming dropouts or struggle with addiction or delinquent behavior later on, if not feeling like they have been found and valued for what they have and what they can bring and who they are. And then the underground gifted students may feel like really insecure and anxious and need to feel included or normal becomes greater than their passion areas. And so if again you're just assuming, oh well, like this is a smart kid, if not finding ways to like get them excited about those strength areas or passion areas, it can just lead to further going underground more and more. And then obviously the dropout, they can become really angry uh, because rightfully so, like the system has not met their needs. And they can feel really rejected, depressed, withdrawn, may act out a lot, really might view school as like irrelevant or hostile and might become really, like bitter. And they really, really, really benefit from very tailored, gifted instruction to meet their specific needs, not the cookie cutter types of things, especially focusing in on like counseling services and social emotional support as well. And then twice exceptional students, like I mentioned earlier, they can really fall into this not really receiving services for their strength areas or for their challenge areas, and just because they don't like match traditional behaviors. And finally, the autonomous learner, like I mentioned, we just want to be able to provide them with creative and flexible opportunities to continue the projection that they're going on. So a lot of different ways, but I like to think of it as it can feel really daunting of like, oh my gosh, I have these 28 kids in my class and I have so many different needs. And it's really easy to just be like, okay, and these kids are already above standard. Like they'll be okay. But I like to kind of challenge that a little bit and saying, finding ways of like still prioritizing their needs as well.
Yeah, so you've really laid out a great argument for why it's so important for these students who might be above in a lot of ways to still get extra support. I'm thinking there might be a new teacher listening who's a little overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know what to do. Are there some, like maybe some low lifts that a teacher could do who's maybe brand new to teaching or relatively new to maybe their area that you'd be like, you could do this today or tomorrow to help these students?
Yes, absolutely. And I know that because I was one of those teachers. I kind of fell into the world of gifted education when I moved back to Iowa and I was doing a little bit of long term subbing and ended up subbing a lot for the gifted facilitator. And she was like, hey, I'm retiring. You should put your name in for this possible position. And so I fell into it before I had my endorsement and was kind of getting my endorsement while also doing the job. And I remember feeling really overwhelmed of like, oh my gosh, I don't even think I'm gifted. How am I supposed to meet the needs of like all of these students when I don't even feel like I know nearly what I need to know in order to meet their needs? But I always I got a lot of like really helpful advice and reminders from my professors as I was getting my endorsement. And so the first and foremost thing I think that's most important is just simply see them, get to know them, appreciate them, respect them for who they are, and show that you really truly value them. That is the first step, is just simply see them and value them. Laugh with them. Laugh at their quirky jokes that they might have at times. Appreciate little quirks that they might have. Point out their strengths. Point out and value that. And especially when it's like the very divergent and when it's something that's like you didn't even think about. And then continuously model what it looks like to have a growth mindset. Because for a lot of my students, being wrong is hard or making a mistake is hard, especially if it's someone who's really struggling with like unhealthy perfectionism. And so, really being that model of when you make a mistake, own it and then use that as a teaching moment to show how it's not the end of the world if we make a mistake. In fact, it actually improves our learning when we make mistakes and when we can have these conversations and when we end up actually realizing that no one knows it all. None of us do. In fact, we're not learning if we already know it all. So just having that mindset of seeing them, evaluating them for who they are as complex human beings, and really don't view them as like the know-it-alls or annoyances or that they're personally attacking you when they're asking questions. View that as curiosity and a chance for you to kind of like help them develop and grow and nurture into those autonomous people that can really like ultimately end up changing the world in a lot of ways. And so that's like, if nothing else, that is where you start, is just kind of checking your own biases that you have, or maybe like your own assumptions, and kind of really getting to know who they are. And as you get to know who they are and how they work and what interests they have, what strengths they have, what weaknesses they have, then you're much more likely to be able to tailor the learning to really meet their specific needs. So, another thing I mentioned a little bit, I was kind of very intimidated myself when I first entered. I was like, interviewed for the job, got the job, accepted the job, and then I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I know nothing about this. A lot of gifted kids also experience that like imposter syndrome, and they might not show it, but they do experience that. And I was experiencing that even going into the field. And remember a saying that I really appreciated from one of my professors of like, you don't need to be the sage on the stage. Look at yourself as the guide on the side. And I really love that idea because as teachers, we don't need to know it all. We don't need to be above our students in the areas that they're interested. We just need to be ready to help guide them and help them get the resources that can continue to help, especially when I was working with my like middle schoolers, and then I did work with some high school as well. It was really about finding connections and the resources to support those kids in their strength areas that I needed to be a rocket scientist in order to help them. So just first of all, kind of like your own mindset as a new teacher working with these kids, and also partner with others. Like find other people that you can partner with. Look in your school, look in your district to see, is there already like a gifted programming or a gifted specialist that you can partner with and bring in and kind of help you find small little ways that you can start to bring in some strategies or activities to support your kids. So if nothing else, that's where you start. Otherwise, collecting lots of books, lots of resources for the varied interests that your kids have. Use the adaptive learning platforms that most schools already have. A lot of schools have like a Dreambox or Lexia or different reading and math programs that naturally adapt to where the kids are. And don't be afraid to use those things because that's a chance for those kids to get some of the higher level or the more relevant work at times. But obviously, that's not what you want to do as your sole way of meeting their needs, but that is one way that you can. Finding ways to really just open up your tasks or your questions to be more open ended, and rather than just like that convergent one right answer, but finding ways to like expand their thinking. A lot of students really benefit from that, not only gifted students, but a lot of students. So even like I oftentimes with our math lessons like to warm up with the like which one doesn't belong. And there's not just one answer, there's like lots of different answers depending on how you look at it. And it really expands everyone's thinking. And then obviously, like finding some different experts out there. There are a lot of really awesome gifted experts who share a lot of free resources too. So I can share some of those websites, but some of my go-to people are Donna Lasher from Big Ideas for Little Scholars. She has tons of different enrichment things that I've used throughout my years, and my students always love anything that I incorporate from hers. Ian Bird from Birdseed has a lot of helpful articles and some resources. Lisa Van Gemert is another one through the Gifted Guru. So just finding one or two people to just slowly start to integrate a few resources is a great way to start.
Yeah, I love those low lifts because, like I said before, there are teachers like you feeling that brand new and not sure where to start. And I think it actually doesn't matter what you're teaching. Because, like, right now, I teach mostly foods classes. And I think about some of my gifted students who they break a dish and there's like a spiral. And I'm like, it's okay.
Yes,
That growth learning mindset of like, it's okay, like dishes break once in a while. It wasn't on purpose or anything. It just fell, or maybe they burnt something. Like it didn't come out the way they thought. And it's like, that's okay. Just try again next time. And it's that growth mindset that's very, very kind of basic to the students that need to kind of think, okay, you can fail and it's okay. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like can be a common characteristic is a lot of gifted kids, they just feel things a lot more intense than neurotypical people. And so, like, especially when it comes to like injustice or feelings, thoughts, those kinds of things, it's just like everything can be more intense. And so it can look kind of interesting to us because we're like, oh, like intellectually you're so advanced, but then you're melting down like a little preschool kid at times. And that's just very common to have that really asynchronous, varied development.
We might not know as teachers that that actually might be an indicator that the student might be gifted as well. So I really appreciate you sharing some kind of low lifts for teachers to do who are brand new. I'm wondering if you could share some things. Let's say there's a teacher who's pretty experienced, their curriculum's, pretty established, and they're thinking, how can I add in some more gifted in learning, maybe a little bit more advanced things for those teachers who may have the room for that challenge for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of loved it because I think you had a philosopher here on recently.
I did.
And I really enjoyed listening to that because I was like, oh, there's so many great techniques there that really support gifted students as well as just like expanding all students' thinking levels. And one of those is like the Socratic circles or the Socratic seminars. That's something I used a lot, especially with my middle school or upper elementary students. And it really kind of expanded their depth of knowledge and their ability to kind of question and not like get stuck on there's just one answer to something. So that's something that could be exciting if you haven't already incorporated that into your teaching to kind of look into. Also expanding the types of questions you're asking. So open-ended versus closed-ended questions. The question formulation technique was something that I tested out a little bit when I worked and I partnered with the health teacher at the middle school because he wanted some support. And so we planned together in ways to incorporate a few little higher level thinking into his just general health lessons. Really thinking about like the Bloom's taxonomy, higher order thinking skills, incorporating tasks that fit more of those synthesize, evaluate, create, analyze. There's so much out there. So even thinking that there's looking into like project-based learning or inquiry research can be really, really great for these kids, especially if they pre-test it out of like a unit because it's very clear they already know it. You can find ways to incorporate like inquiry-based learning or project-based learning to kind of fill some of that direct teaching time that they don't really need to sit through. So finding authentic ways and meaningful ways to have them continue to learn, even in those time periods when they might already know the basics that you're teaching most of the class. And kind of tailoring small groups. One thing that I really enjoyed is finding ways to still find extensions and enrichments. Because depending on your school, the research supports acceleration very strongly, but a lot of districts and a lot of schools don't necessarily always allow that. And so if you're in a space that doesn't allow a student to move up to another grade level for math, for example, finding ways to deepen or enrich and extend the topics that they're learning. So one thing that I really love doing with like my fourth and fifth graders is when dealing with like addition and subtraction or just the number systems is teaching them different bases. So going beyond base 10. And that was something that they just absolutely, their minds were blown and really excited to learn about and to think about. So finding little ways of like, how can you take whatever you're working on, but continue to extend or enrich? Uh, a lot of gifted experts encourage really planning for hitting your high learning targets first and then build the scaffolds for others below that. So instead of just planning for kind of like a low expectation and then thinking, okay, how am I going to add in these other activities for my high learners? Like start by thinking about your high learners and then pare it down and pare it down, pare it down. And so there's a lot of amazing resources out there. So just kind of picking an area, maybe you want to work on your questioning, maybe you want to work on projects, maybe you want to work on thinking about how you could pretest and compact what the unit is and finding ways to have them like maybe sit out on a couple of the really like mundane step-by-step direct learning parts of it. And ultimately, just finding lots of ways to provide like opportunities for students' strengths to come out, like their varied strengths. So I like to always view my role as a teacher to be really talent development and not just being like, oh, I only work with my identified students, but like finding ways for all students to have opportunities to find their strength areas and to lean into that, to nurture that.
One thing that I'm thinking about in terms of just like pragmatically, do you use templates for things? Like, for example, let's say that this lesson, you're like, this student already knows this. Can I give them this paper or something, or this slide deck or something? Is that something that you would incorporate?
Yeah, yeah, sometimes definitely. Or I like to use like contracts too, because if they are going to be sitting out of certain lessons, I like them to agree to like, if this, then this, to still hold them accountable for learning. Because if they're just like, oh, I don't get to, I don't have to do this, it's really helping them go through that. And so, yes, I do have some of those things. And also sometimes I make them up on the spot because it can be very tailored to whatever the student is doing. But a lot of students love to create, yeah, like PowerPoint slides to demonstrate their knowledge about something or use Canva or different things like that. And I think just in general for all teachers, it's really helpful to provide choice and to different allow students to have choice in like the content, product, or the process of how they gain the knowledge.
I actually have a project, a few that I use in my class that are student choice, and I find that the students just love it. But I think gifted students especially would really enjoy it because they have a choice of what they're going to study a little more. So
Yeah.
yeah, love
And I
that.
found that when I started out, I would give so many choices, but sometimes like those choices that I gave were not very deep or fully developed because I just felt like I needed to have a lot. And then over time, I realized really you don't have to have like a huge choice board or choice menu of tasks. Like you can have a few, but have them so that they're just like really, truly deeper, thinking a deeper rather than having a lot that are really just kind of fluff or busy work. So I've loved that. Like over time, I've gotten better about that of like providing more meaningful choices rather than just trying to think of every choice under the sun that I could.
Yeah, because maybe just also you could choose one topic and have them choose within that topic. Is that kind of what you're alluding to a little bit as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I do a food project, and I tell them they can choose any country, to choose for the food, but, like, it's still about food. It's still
Yes.
in that
Yes.
realm. Just going back for a minute here, you kinda mentioned briefly the idea of collaboration and working together in teams or groups. Do you have any tips for teachers as they make meaningful groups with how to place and work with gifted and talented students?
That's a great question. There are, again, a lot of different research and models out there. And I think one thing that's really important is to keep in mind flexible grouping. Um, but before I get into the flexible grouping, cluster grouping is kind of a model ensuring that, like in a gen ed class, there are between 3 to 5 highly capable learners grouped together instead of having just like one or two. And that can be really helpful in also impacting those students and not feeling alone or that they don't fit in, and having other peers who kind of share some of that interest or drive or the deeper learning is important, I think. Oftentimes, I know we like to kind of spread them out as much as possible as teachers because I want this, like, I want this spread out, but I think it is helpful to make sure that you do ensure that they have at least one or two other students that if you do small group in a certain area, they have a peer and they're not always working. But with in your gen ed classes, I think flexible grouping is really important and not just thinking that "Well, this kid is on my list, they're identified gifted, so they're going to automatically be in every single high group that I need to do, but really using pre-testing to help gain knowledge because you also might have some students that are not identified gifted, but really do have a lot of knowledge or really are ready for something different in a certain topic or area. Being willing to be flexible with that. Certain times you will want to kind of group according to ability level, but other times you don't need to. You can group according to like interest level, or other times it is really important to have all sorts of different types of ability levels coming together and all different types of strengths and challenges, because that's just life in general, is learning to work with others and each of you bringing in your own unique personality, your own unique strengths, your own unique challenges, and finding ways to kind of solve problems in new ways. So I like to think about interest levels. It kind of depends on the focus of what you're doing and what type of group you're going to be doing. But I just like to remind myself to always be flexible and don't get stuck into just a routine.
When you use the word flexible, just to clarify, that means that to put students of varying levels together. That's what
Yeah.
flexible means in this term. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right because there's certain times when, for example, guided reading, you might want to do more levels, right? Because they're at a certain level and you're maybe doing guided read groups. But if you're doing something like a science project together, maybe you are more flexible with that grouping.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I find that sometimes with my reading or my math, I can tend to be more according to readiness of like what are they ready for? But you're like in science and social studies, I love to mix it up a lot more. And even sometimes in math too. Surprise the kids.
Yeah. I think when we're thinking about grouping and thinking about some of these students might struggle with collaborative process because maybe they're really used to doing it themselves and feeling like they want to do it on their own. Are there struggles that you see with gifted and talented students in collaboration or in general that you'd be like to watch out for?
Yeah, definitely. I can see that in collaboration a lot of times, especially with some of my students. They have a very specific idea in their mind. And not only if they can't produce what they're imagining, it can be really hard. Not only if they're just working with others, but also themselves. So sometimes they can get kind of stuck in this cycle of getting really upset when something's not going according to what they're planning or what's going on in their head. Like I mentioned some other like the unhealthy perfectionism is can be a struggle, not for all gifted kids, but kind of finding ways to, like we mentioned earlier, continue to model and teach and value the growth mindset and the grit and the resilience. Some other challenges or struggles that like a lot of my students have kind of struggled with are sensitivity, like we mentioned, kind of being that highly sensitive or overly overexcitabilities, those kinds of things. Super heightened awareness of what's going on in the world, those kinds of things. And so having also like social emotional supports for students and asynchronous development, it can be a really big thing because I think it's easy for us as adults to be like, oh, this kid has this vocabulary of a 10th grader, so they should be acting like a 10th grader in all things. But that's just not the reality. Like, this is still a fourth grader or a third grader or whatever grade level they are. And that is not fair to assume that just because their intellect is in one area, that the rest of their social, behavioral, all of that is also in that area. And that could be hard for a kid too when there's kind of like unfair pressures put on them as well. And sometimes they put those pressures on themselves. And so that can be a struggle from the social emotional perspective as well.
Yeah, I think about like Sheldon. Have you ever watched that show?
But yes,
I think about him and just like, not only was he at that level, he actually was in high school, like according to like the show at a very young
yes,
age. So of course it's like he's intellectually there, but emotionally he's still a kid. He still wants to be a child, he's still having those moments. So that's just a really important memory of like how important it is to calibrate that in your mind of like maybe they are really smart or they have that vocabulary, but emotionally they still need to be a kid. They still need to have those moments to play and imagination and fun and things. So
exactly.
yeah.
And someone could be gifted in a specific domain area. And so I've run into this a lot too with some of my gifted kids where like they're incredibly advanced in math, but writing, they just shut down. Or even having to write out their thinking in math, they shut down. So just recognizing that that's actually more common than you think. And it's not the kids like trying to be difficult. It's like literally something that you need to work with them in using their strengths to motivate them in some of their weaker areas as well.
Yeah, you can be really good at one thing and maybe not so good at another. I guess kind of a wrapping up question here. If you had unlimited time and support, what's something you'd create or change in schools to better support the gifted and talented students?
Yeah, I know that's something I'm always thinking about. I'm like, I just wish I had unlimited time and unlimited resources and unlimited all of the things because the reality is once the school year starts, it starts and it's crazy. But I think for me, more t- m- I think it would be really lovely if schools could really think about their identification process and how to revamp that to truly update it so that it's really equitable in identifying all types of gifted learners and to really fight against missing out on a lot of these underrepresented populations. And so that's one thing when I did have a chance to be kind of in a position where I could change that in a district. That was one thing I worked really hard in is finding multiple pathways into services. And then along with that is like then determining the services that can support the many different varied needs of gifted students. So just having more time to revamp that in schools would be wonderful. On just like a personal level, I would love to have more time and opportunity to just simply like create more tasks, more activities, more templates, like you said, that are tied to the standards. Because ultimately, we do oftentimes have to teach, prove that we're teaching to the standard, but finding ways to like create differentiated or tiered assignments from the curriculum that might be provided. But oftentimes, as you know, the curriculum doesn't have a lot of that already built into it. So finding ways to build off of provided curriculum, but finding ways to like extend and enrich it a lot more instead of having to do it like last minute and feeling like you're sinking and swimming.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes with teaching, it is crazy how much we are required to produce. Actual teaching takes up so much time, and then we have to
Yes.
plan for that teaching, and it's like people don't realize that we always need more time planning because, like, in any other profession, you would be given so much more time to present for 5 hours a day. They'd be like, "Oh, you can have a
Right.
whole day of planning," right? But, like, we're like, "Oh, here's an hour," which I'm grateful for, but it's also like, that's not enough for us to,
It's not enough.
really expand our things, and so I think for me, it's kinda taken years to kind of establish myself and get like, "Okay, now I know this or that," and pull from things, but it still takes time. Yeah,
Yes, it does.
as you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any final thoughts with gifted and talented learning that we haven't covered that you wanna share with the audience?
I feel like I barely scratched the surface, but ultimately I want to bring back that reminder of like start small and build up. Don't feel like you have to do everything perfect or right in order to get started. Just kind of starting small and starting to slowly incorporate some of these things if you aren't already. Then that momentum, as you're starting to see the ways that your students, it can support your students, then slowly you can start to bring in more. And don't be afraid to use other people, other resources, other experts to connect your students to. And I think, like what we said earlier, just don't forget that these are still kids. The social emotional side is just as important as the academic side when supporting students.
Yeah, those are some great finishing thoughts, especially because it can seem overwhelming, especially towards the middle or end of the year. We're starting to feel a little tired. And so it's just those little things sometimes, like you said, that can make a big difference. Seeing them, understanding them, and just doing the best with what we have. Okay, we have some quick questions for the audience to get to know you a little better. First question. Favorite teacher lunch?
Probably anytime the PTA caters or brings in potluck style. I love it on the days when they're like, oh, lunch is being provided by PTA, or at our school, we do Wednesdays. Like once a year, you sign up for a week where you're in charge of kitchen duty, but also you're in charge of Wednesday treats. And people at my school like go all out. So oftentimes I don't even need to pack a lunch for my Wednesday because there's just so much good charcuterie boards, or sometimes people bring in like homemade soups or curries or different things like that. So I will always love a lunch that I don't personally have to make.
I agree. Absolutely agree. Worst teacher lunch.
There's not really, I mean, any lunch is still lunch, and that's a good thing.
Right.
So I wouldn't say there's a worse lunch, just because I'm really trying to make sure that I eat lunch no matter how crazy the day is. And sometimes, but it's not exactly ideal when part of that lunch is in between supporting students in class because I did not actually have a lunch break.
Yes.
So
Worst
that would
lunch
be
is
my
when there's no
lunch.
lunch.
Yes.
Your best behavior management tip.
I would say clear is kind. I think being very clear and consistent in expectations, being like very proactive about it and upfront about it. I oftentimes like to get my kids involved in creating shared agreements or shared kind of like expectations and what that looks like, what that sounds like, and why. I really like to kind of dig into the why behind some of the agreements or expectations that we have and just making sure that you're very clear and kind and consistent with that so that kids aren't confused about like, oh, why is it okay this time but not this time? And then I think for me too, something that I've really found has helped my classroom management is also being human, being real and being human. And those moments where if I have made a mistake or if I have reacted in a way that wasn't ideal, really being able to use that and model of how even as adults, we sometimes mess up and then how can we make that right? So I think that's been really helpful for me too in my classroom management is helping the kids also be able to see and then sometimes I've seen them imitate that in their life as well.
Especially with gifted students, I think they need to know that fairness and see that consistency and clarity. Yeah. A teacher that made a difference in your life.
I think all my teachers made a difference in my life one way or another, but for some reason, my third grade teacher, Mrs. Sandersfeld, just really stood out to me. I think she's like the real reason that I was like, I want to do this job. And I just remember we did so many fun learning tasks, but she also held me to a high standard as well and was clear and consistent. And one time when I worked really hard on a project and didn't put my name on it, she threw it away. Still remember that to this day, but also like because of all of the other ways that she inspired and encouraged and like supported me, that didn't keep me from becoming a teacher myself.
And I bet you always remember your name now, right?
I do. I do. And I always tell that story, and I don't do that to my kids.
Take some and leave some, right? Okay. Last question here is last lesson you taught.
That is harder to remember just because I'm on summer break. So once summer break hit, I'm like, I'm done. Just
Amnesia.
kidding. Amnesia. I was like, wait a second, what did, because you know, that last week of school is always very crazy with promotion. And I teach that last year, I taught fourth and fifth. And so we have a promotion for our fifth graders. And so much of the week is like practicing promotion and practicing the speeches, actually hosting the promotion and all of that. But some of the last lessons I taught at the end of the year were fourth grade health lessons. So in Washington State, we have state lessons that we're required to teach as just gen ed teachers. And those are always quite amusing and fun. And it's really cute to see just their curiosity and their uncomfortableness as we start to teach them a little bit more about changes that are coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Becca, for being here. I know our audience is going to get a lot of value from what you shared about gifted and talented students and how to better engage and challenge them. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with our audience.
Thank you, Annie. Appreciate it.